Good afternoon to our listeners on Parliament Radio 105.5 FM, viewers on the Parliament channel, and those of you joining us on the World Wide Web, on the Parliament's YouTube channel ParlView, or via our website www.ttparliament.org. We welcome you to today's sitting of the House. Many questions on the order paper today, including Prime Minister's questions. We take you over now to the chamber for the start of today's proceedings.
The Honourable, the Speaker.
We welcome you to the 25th sitting of the House in the first session of the 11th Parliament that takes place on Friday, May 20th, 2016.
Almighty God, we give thanks to you, the Creator of the universe, and humbly beseech you to direct and prosper the deliberations of the members of this House here assembled for the advancement of your glory and the trust and welfare of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Grant that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be established among us for all generations. Amen. Amen. Namaste.
Oath or affirmation. Announcements by the Speaker.
Honorable members, I have received the following communication. The Honorable Camille Robinson Regis, MP, member for Arouca Maloney, has requested that leave of absence from sittings of the House during the period May 17, 2016 to 22nd of May 2016. The leave which the member seeks is granted.
Bills brought from the Senate. Petitions. Papers.
The Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay on the table the following papers. Papers number 1 to 2. The third reports of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Northwest Regional Health Authority for the years ended September 30th, 2002 and 2003. 3. The second report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Northwest Regional Health Authority for the year ended September 30th, 2004. 4. The consolidated financial statements of the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards and its subsidiary Premier Quality Services Limited for the year ended September 30th, 2013. 5. The audited financial statements of the Police Complaints Authority for the year ended September 30th, 2014. 6 to 7. The annual audited financial statements of National Entrepreneurship Development Company Limited for the financial years ended September 30th, 2013 and 2014. 8 to 9. The audited financial statements of the National Schools Dietary Services Limited for the years ended September 30th, 2013 and 2014. 10. The consolidated audited financial statements of the National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year ended December 31st, 2015. Madam Speaker, I beg to move that papers 1 to 5 be referred to the Public Accounts Committee and papers 6 to 10 to the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee.
Honorable members, the question is that papers 1 to 5 be referred to the Public Accounts Committee and papers 6 to 10 to the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. The Attorney General.
Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay on the table the 5th annual report of the Police Complaints Authority for the period October 1st, 2014 to September 30th, 2015.
Reports from committees. Prime Minister's questions.
Leader of the Opposition.
Will the Prime Minister kindly inform this House when payments will be made to the families of officers of the protective services killed in the line of duty.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to inform the member for Superior, Leader of the Opposition, that this matter is currently before the Cabinet, and in the not too distant future, an appropriate policy would be concluded, and the persons who are so affected would be serviced in the context of a policy that deals specifically and clearly with the issue at hand.
Leader of the Opposition.
Honourable Prime Minister may recall when this matter arose not too long ago, the Honourable Minister had indicated a time frame of a couple of weeks. That time has now expired, and would Honourable Prime Minister give us a time frame within which these deliberations would be concluded?
Prime Minister.
That is true. What has happened is that the issue is a little more complex than just handing someone a check, because there are a number of side issues that have come into the policy. So we are just ensuring that the policy is sufficiently robust to treat with the eventualities. And we are close to conclusion, so I could, without being held to the gallows, I would think that by the end of June, we'd have concluded it. Yeah, 4 weeks, which would give the Cabinet, well, we have, I would say by the end of June, this should be operationalized.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam. Would the Honourable Prime Minister be kind enough to indicate or tell us what are some of the side issues that the Honourable Prime Minister is referring to?
Considering that it is the honourable member who's asking the question who initiated this matter years ago,
2014.
I would have thought that she'd have been familiar with the issues. But one of the biggest issues is exactly who the claimants will be and who are the beneficiaries who will be dealt with and in what circumstances, so as to prevent an entanglement once you begin to provide this support. That is one of the issues and one of the main issues dealing with. Okay?
Member for Tabakit.
Would the Honourable Prime Minister be able to say whether the policy, the date of the policy when it's announced, will be the date from which persons will be affected, or would you go back from when the announcement was previously made?
It is our intention to initiate it on the basis of the date that the commitment was made in the budget statement.
Leader of the Opposition.
2014.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Madam. Would the Honourable Prime Minister inform the House when his government intends to honour the outstanding payments to cane farmers?
Madam Speaker, as the member knows, the government has committed itself to making what hopefully will be the final payments on this issue. However, certain queries have come to our attention, and what is happening right now at the Ministry of Finance is that an audit is being done at the moment, or is about to be commenced, to ensure that the persons to whom these monies are being paid are in fact the persons to whom the money should be paid, and the quantum to be paid to each person is the quantum that is to be paid. And as soon as we get that cleared up, the payment will be made, and we'll do so with dispatch.
Member for Tabakit.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In light of the growing concerns by the motoring and travelling public in respect of the 80 km/h speed limit and its possible negative impact on national productivity levels, could the Honourable Prime Minister state whether the government intends to review or revisit the current speed limit with a way towards changing the same?
As I have outlined recently, it is the government's intention to review the whole question of what is the speed limit. The speed limit should really be considered in the context of the quality of the road. There ought to be an overall speed limit on the best roads, which would be the fastest speed. But other roads, and also determine the location and concentration of population around those locations. What we anticipate is going to happen is that on review, the Ministry of Transport will come up with speed limits to suit the various locations and the quality of the road as per design. However, the 80 km speed limit that is now in force, which is deemed to be a little on the slow side, we have roads designed, our main highways, which we believe might be able to support safely possibly in the order of 100 kilometers, which is 60 miles an hour. And if that is enforced, that should give us the level of safety while removing the negative effects of too slow. So the Transport Ministry is looking at it and will come up with speed limits at various locations on various roads. Thank you.
Honourable Prime Minister, is there some timeline when this study will be completed by the Ministry of Works and Transport?
I would expect that the Ministry of Transport, I don't have a date that I can give you, but this is not something that should detain the ministry too long, because it generally has to do with what is reasonable safety based on data of the known roadways and what the best practices in these matters.
Member for Chaguanas West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In light of the data from the Central Statistical Office of an increase in the employment rate, could the Prime Minister state what are the government's plans to generate sustainable jobs for citizens of this country?
I don't know that 0.1% the employment rate has gone up.
0.1%.
Well, anyway, whatever the rate is, whether it's employment rate or unemployment rate, the government is taking steps to shore up the oil and gas sector, because that is the main sector that pays our bills. So notwithstanding the fact that we are overly dependent on that sector, first item of business is to ensure that we shore up that sector. We have serious challenges at Petrotrin and elsewhere, and those challenges are attracting the attention of the cabinet and the general population engaged there. We also have the issue of our downstream industries, which have been suffering considerably from gas curtailment. That is another issue which is attracting the government's attention, and we have put a lot of effort into focusing on ensuring that we increase our potential for gas supply and our activities which will result in there be sufficient gas to maintain and even expand into new industries. I can tell you now that we have concluded the renegotiations that took place with respect to the Mitsubishi plant, and that plant is now about to kick off in a serious way. The Japanese authorities and the Trinidad and Tobago authorities have come to agreement. The local investors, NGC and Massey, have now concluded that. And now, if the gas becomes available, we will have an expansion in that downstream area. We also expect that the efforts we are making focusing on agriculture and reforestation will result in significant employment creation as we expand, knowing that we will not be able to be self-sufficient in food supply, but we intend to produce as much as we are able to, maximizing the arable land that's available to us, and the non-arable land we are identifying in the various corporations areas for afforestation, where we will plant commercial timber which can be nurtured over time and become valuable and become a source of employment on an ongoing basis. We also are taking steps to ensure that our maritime potential is developed.
Prime Minister, your time has expired.
I can tell you.
Member for Chaguanas West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You indicated that you have renegotiated the Mitsubishi. When are you going to inform the national community of the terms and conditions of this renegotiation?
There will be a statement in Parliament, possibly at the next sitting of Parliament.
Member for Superior.
Thank you, Honourable Prime Minister. You indicated that you would be taking steps to shore up the energy sector. Would you kindly indicate what steps or how you intend to shore up this sector?
Well, for a start, as I speak to you now, there are a number of rigs that should be at work. And because of Petrotrin's inability to support them at work, it requires interventions of one kind or another. So with the output expected to be that these rigs go back out to work so that we can improve the drilling arrangements and to allow us to prevent this downward spiraling of our oil production. Because as you may be aware, I'm sure you're aware, that our oil production has been trending downwards precipitously and is a matter of great concern to the government and should be of people of Trinidad and Tobago. And we also, the whole question about the ease at which acreage can become available for those who have invested in the potential to drill, we need to do things a little differently to allow all hands on deck with respect to the search for and the producing of oil and gas, especially oil for Petrotrin and others.
Manzanilla.
Madam Speaker, Honorable Prime Minister, you had indicated just a little bit ago that you were going to look at the arable and non-arable lands and determine how they go forward in terms of whether you develop the various industries. Are you going to protect the aquifers while you're doing that?
Well, wherever we have aquifers, whether they are on the arable or non-arable land, there are considerations that there's a water resource agency in the country which will ensure that as we proceed, that we do not damage any of our aquifers irreparably. But I do not know that afforestation will be hurting any aquifer. In fact, it's the opposite. If you increase the afforestation, you protect the aquifers. And if we have agriculture, the aquifers are only at risk depending on what chemicals we use, and that is under another kind of arrangement with respect to the handling of chemicals in the agricultural sector.
Madam, Honourable Prime Minister, we welcome your words indicating that you want to bring rigs that are not in production at this time or deficient in production the word uses to shore up to bring these in. Can we get any idea as to when we can expect to see some of these rigs into more production?
I couldn't tell you that today because there's a meeting of the Energy Subcommittee on Wednesday which is focusing specifically on this matter. So if you ask me after Wednesday, I'll give you a tighter outcome, right?
Member for Chaguanas West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Honourable Prime Minister, in the light of the upsurge in murders and serious crime in Central Region in recent days and months, could the Honourable Prime Minister indicate whether consideration will be given to implementing the joint police-army patrols in this area?
Well, clearly, Madam Speaker, that the member is not listening to the government, because had he been listening to the government, he would have heard the National Security Minister saying that this is already taking place. So, and the minister went as far as to say that this arrangement is one of the features of what we are doing now in responding to the criminal element. And insofar as there are areas which are suffering spikes and upsurge, this arrangement would target those areas and, of course, the known elements within the community who are behind increases in crime in various areas. There was one time when, as we started to experience this upsurge in crime of this nature, it was the feeling that it was a Laventille, Port of Spain East problem. But I'm sure members will observe now that there are other areas in the country, while there is peace in Laventille, we have other areas in the country which are experiencing that kind of problem. And the security services will focus on criminal activity wherever it rears its ugly head.
Hoover North.
Thank you very much, Honourable Prime Minister. Based on what you said earlier with the Joint Police-Army Patrol that is on the ground as we speak, that is untrue because in the constituency of Couva North and wider the Couva region, there isn't any. So can we get an answer as to when these joint army police patrols will be implemented in the Couva region?
If the member for Couva North knows exactly where the security services are deployed, army, police, and otherwise, and is in a position to say I'm a liar, what can I do? All I can do is to report that our security services, under those who are in charge of those services, have reported to the National Security Council, and the Minister has reported to the country that as part of our crime-fighting effort, we are deploying elements of the security services in joint army patrols, and that those patrols will increase and continue. If for you that's a lie, well, I can't help you.
But for Couva South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Honourable Prime Minister, as we speak today, just about an hour ago, a gentleman was fatally shot on Railway Road in Couva in the vicinity of the Nallis Library. And from your knowledge, Prime Minister, is there any joint army patrol in the Couva South constituency within Point Lisas, taking into consideration that 3 persons have been murdered in the Point Lisas area within the last week?
To the best of my knowledge, the defense and other security services are not being deployed on a constituency basis. They would be deployed to wherever in the national community there is a need for their deployment. And therefore, I am not in a position to answer your question on the basis of a constituency at this point in time. But however, if it is that you want a report on exactly where the patrols have taken place, where they are, and where they will go, I am sure that the government will be able to give you that as we go forward.
Member for Caroni East.
Thank you. Honorable Prime Minister, as head of the National Security Council, are you in a position to indicate, of course with national security concerns, when the Minister of National Security speaks of an integrated approach to dealing with this, does he specifically speak of this joint army police patrol, or are there other issues which you are mentioning that once you determine that where the areas of focus should be, what does he mean by integrated approach? You are head of the National Security Council.
Member, I will not allow that as a supplemental question. Member for Superior.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Honourable Prime Minister, with respect to your comments that the joint patrols are taking place, which we are very happy to hear, and of course, perhaps with your minister, you may seek to place those where they may be more needed. Would the government, Honourable Prime Minister, or has the government been taken into consideration the dicta of Justice Frank C. Prasad in a recent court matter with respect to putting a regulatory framework for the joint patrols, army, police patrols?
There is a regulatory framework because police officers and soldiers don't just take it upon themselves to go out onto the street and parade. They fall under the various acts which control the police and the defense force. And there is a reporting order in the defense force and in the police service. If there is something else that has to be done, I'm not in a position today to tell you about that.
Member for Oropuch East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. To the Honourable Prime Minister, given the concerns of the representatives in the House on the accuracy of the information that you're giving the House, would the Prime Minister undertake to verify that information about joint police army patrols in central Trinidad, since there's a serious concern about the accuracy of the information you're giving?
I did not speak about police army patrol in central Trinidad. I said wherever in the country there is a need for the joint patrols to focus on an upsurge of criminal activity, it is the intention of and it is the approach of the government to focus on that. You are trying to bring it down to your constituency and central Trinidad. I did not take that approach. I have said to you, the approach of the government agencies is that as we see the upsurge, those in charge of the security services would direct them to those areas of upsurge. We now know and we are experiencing and we are seeing an upsurge in central Trinidad, and therefore the policy I've just outlined, it should follow from that, that response will take place to and in central Trinidad. And of course, central Trinidad is not the only area where we are seeing that kind of upsurge. And therefore, we will respond, and I said so a while ago, wherever the criminal element raises its head.
Member for Faizabad.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Given recent statements that the number of people accessing treatment for non-communicable diseases, so-called NCDs, through the public health care system is placing a heavy burden on the state's resources of a reported $6 billion annually, would the Honourable Prime Minister state whether the government plans to maintain funding for the treatment of the NCDs?
Madam Speaker, I don't know that I could respond to a statement which I don't believe is accurate. Because if it is that the state is spending $6 billion annually on non-communicable diseases, what then is the national budget for health? something can't be right here. $6 billion on non-communicable diseases in a budget of what? This is the entire budget for the whole health system. So something is in error, and therefore I can't respond to this error.
Member for Faizabad.
Honorable Prime Minister, it was based on a reported statement. Would you endeavor to correct or give the accurate figure in these circumstances?
Anybody who is familiar with the national budget will know to dismiss a statement like this as an error. We are not in a position, even if we want to spend $6 billion on any aspect of the health system. That is the whole budget on one item. So therefore something is wrong with the question. It's based on misinformation. You're asking me to respond to misinformation. As a member of parliament who dealt with the national budget, you must know that there's no way that there could be $6 billion being spent on one item like this.
Honorable Prime Minister, would you be kind enough to indicate, therefore, in view of the comment you have just made, whether the government will continue to support NCD's expenditure?
Of course, as part of the overall health effort, the Ministry of Health will, there's an allocation for non-communicable diseases, and that will continue. And depending on what is happening in the country, it may have to expand if we have an outbreak of this or an outbreak of that, or depending on what is the problem. But certainly, to predicate it on this scale of expenditure as an unusual development is a bit of an error and some misinformation.
Member for Faizabad.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Prime Minister, in view of the established role of primary health care in the prevention and treatment and early detection of NCDs, can the Prime Minister indicate whether his government intends to expand and increase the number of health centers with extended hours in the nation?
Member for Faizabad, I won't allow that as a supplemental question. Member for Shogunas East.
Honorable Prime Minister, again, I'm on the question of the NCDs. Honorable Prime Minister, are you aware that there is also a critical shortage of supply of drugs for NCDs?
I am not aware of that.
Member for Kamuto Mansanilla.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Honorable Prime Minister, given the apparent increase in sexual abuse reports of children under the age of 16, could the Honorable Prime Minister explain how the government intends to protect minors from predators?
You should be familiar with that.
What did you say? He said he should be familiar with that. What do you mean by that?
Madam Speaker, the government of Trinidad and Tobago is doing all in its power to, at the Office of the Prime Minister, where the Children's Authority is, to continue to build awareness on the rights of the child, and in particular, child sexual abuse. The month of April, there was a focus on child abuse. The communication strategy will intensify in the coming months for parents and guardians. The aim is to reach everyone and every community in Trinidad and Tobago on this subject. We are currently partnering with the Ministry of Education and civil society organizations, the West Indian Cricket Board, to build the skills of coaches and other persons involved in sports, teachers and caregivers, to notice, to recognize, and report cases of child abuse. This Train the Trainer and Spread the Work initiative will continue. The Children's Authority is responding via its emergency unit to these cases of child abuse, sexual abuse, and is actively supporting the process to ensure that the care and protection of these vulnerable and at-risk children are removed from their predators. The Police Child Protection Unit is also doing its part to actively pursue and arrest those predators and bring them to justice.
Honourable Prime Minister, in light of what you have just indicated with respect to the Children's Authority and the Child Protection Unit, can you indicate what specific measures government intends to take in terms of adding additional support to both the Child Protection Unit and the Children's Authority in light of, in the past week, both the Child Protection Unit and the Children's Authority have been complaining of being starved or being under-resourced?
there's an assumption being made that the Children's Authority is woefully understaffed, which is not correct. There's a provision for 242 members of staff, which is growing as more and more regional offices are established to provide services. In September 2015, the staff stood at 73. As of May 2016, the staff is now at 127. That's an increase of 54 persons added since we have taken responsibility. Under the previous administration, Cabinet in May 2013 noted that staff for the decentralized offices will only be recruited when these offices have been established. Several of
the... please. Member for Princestown, there is a particular decorum to be followed. You cannot sit and shout across the floor. I would ask you to please abide by the standing orders. Continue, Prime Minister.
Several of the decentralized offices are either under construction or arrangements are underway to lease rent premises for the offices. Therefore, all the positions at the Children's Authority are not expected to be filled at this time. As we put the offices, the physical arrangements in place, we staff those offices. And that will explain why the staffing level has grown from 73 to 127 and growing towards 242, which is the establishment overall. Additionally, the authority has experienced a high level of staff turnover since it began its operations. The high turnover of human resource has to be examined and addressed by the authority. We need to look at this issue of persons not either finding job fulfillment or make the positions more attractive, but we really need to have people settle down in the jobs that become available in this agency. So overall, it is not that we are abandoning the requirement to provide the resources to the authority. The opposite is the truth.
Member for Kamuto Mansinella.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Prime Minister, I've heard you speak about reaching caregivers, parents, coaches, everybody. What are you doing to reach the children to begin to educate them on the rights, on their rights?
I thought I did mention that there's an initiative at the level of the school. And that's why you mentioned teachers. The involvement of teachers is so as to get to the children.
Yes.
Honorable Prime Minister, sexual abuse does include the issue of teenage pregnancies. And the Central Statistical Office has reported many times that there are over 2,500 teenage pregnancies on an annual basis. What is the state or the government or your government doing to protect these minors from the predators who are above age 20, 30, 40, 50?
Well, all arrangements are in place for law enforcement to take place. If it is that there are these infractions taking place and law enforcement is turning a blind eye, the national sensitization I just mentioned should bring to the attention of those whose job it is to ensure that where these developments take place, persons responsible are held accountable.
We'll be speaking in detail to it in the chair.
Member for Caroni East.
But as head of National Security Council, where crime, it is a statutory rape, would you pay particular attention as the Honorable Prime Minister to prevent this from happening and become actively involved in the process to prevent this?
This is a matter of law enforcement, and the National Security Council deals with all matters of law enforcement, including this matter. However, as a priority, we are focusing on it in the area of public education and expecting that those who are on the job will respond to what you've outlined.
Honourable members, the time permitted under standing orders for Prime Minister's questions has expired. Would it meet the concurrence of the House for the time to be extended?
Yes. All right.
We shall proceed. Keep on. So, member for Caroni East, question 8.
Is the Prime Minister able to tell this House what foreign control measures, foreign control currency measures would be introduced in an effort to stop the TT currency from depreciating further?
Madam Speaker, the exchange rate policy of the central bank dictates that the central bank considers, among other things, prevailing demand and supply conditions, as well as past and prospective foreign exchange flows, while aiming to limit exchange rate volatility. In Trinidad and Tobago, we operate a managed float system of foreign exchange. The central bank, therefore, in consultation with the government through the Ministry of Finance, intervenes in the foreign exchange market from time to time and establishes the range of foreign exchange rates, which by way of a formula will fix the maximum selling rate. And as you may recall, at the mid-year review, the Minister of Finance in this Parliament indicated a specific range within which the central bank will operate to maintain the stability of the currency. And that range is in the order, I think, of 650 to 681. And that range that's operating, and we have not been outside that.
For Caronese.
Honorable Prime Minister, bearing in mind your managed float system, if the managed float system allows the currency to move swiftly beyond the 681, 682, what as the Minister of Finance and your administration, are you going to take any measures to hold it at 682, and for how long?
Madam Speaker, I'm not sure what exactly the member is asking me, because the Minister of Finance was very clear. He said it is the intention of the government to follow a policy where the central bank will defend the currency within that range. So I don't know what the question is about.
Member for Caroni.
So in essence, I'm gathering from you, Honorable Prime Minister, that the intention of the government is to hold it to the limit of 682 and not to allow it to go beyond. Yes?
Madam Speaker, I'm trying to help the member. The answer has already been given. There's a demand for the currency, there's movement of the currency. We have stated that we will defend the currency within that band, and that's what's happening right now. The central bank is operating the system with an intention to defend the currency within that band. So I don't understand what you're asking me.
Member for Naparima.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In the light of the present economic challenges in nearby Venezuela and the likelihood of an influx of refugees, could the Prime Minister tell us what plans, immigration and otherwise, are in place to proactively deal with this possible influx?
Madam Speaker, the government of Trinidad and Tobago recognizes that the situation in Venezuela is tenuous, and in light of the unknown prevailing economic and political environments, we have been monitoring, by way of our mission in Venezuela and other sources, what has been happening in our nearest neighbor. It would therefore be remiss of acknowledgement if acknowledgement is not given to the possible effect that an increasing unstable Venezuela will have on our twin island nation state. However, the government will not be caught off guard in this situation, as domestic efforts to address the refugee situation in Trinidad and Tobago has been ongoing since the government of Trinidad and Tobago acceded to the 1951 Convention and 1961 Protocol of Refugees and Asylum Seekers. In other words, we are aware that if the situation deteriorates to the point of a flow of refugees out of Venezuela, that Trinidad and Tobago has obligations under international law. It is worth noting that by Cabinet Minute number 162 of June the 5th, 2014, the government of Trinidad and Tobago approved the adoption of the National Policy to Address Refugees and Asylum Seekers, which was the initial step to ensure that Trinidad and Tobago abide by its obligations under the 1951 Convention. The national policy was developed through consultation with multiple key stakeholders and will provide for the gradual development of domestic refugee status determination in Trinidad and Tobago. Currently, determinations of refugee status are conducted externally by the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees in Washington, D.C., in collaboration with its local honorary liaison, the Living Water Community. It is to be noted that the UNHCR will continue to partner with the government of Trinidad and Tobago in the implementation of the national policy of Trinidad and Tobago and the development of the national RSD in its initial phases. There has been continued collaboration among key stakeholders on the matter of refugees.
Expired. Member for Chaguanas West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Honorable Prime Minister, has any person from Venezuela claimed refugee status or made a request for refugee status? Because I get the impression that what we're having is more economic migrants than refugees.
I'm not aware, as I'm speaking to you now, that there are persons claiming refugee status, but I'm aware that there are a number of persons in Venezuela who are seeking aid and succor in Trinidad and Tobago, including, I've seen in the newspapers, persons buying items from Trinidad, household items, one of which is LPG, which is in fact a subsidized product in Trinidad and Tobago. And we have to consider whether in fact that kind of exportation is something we can sustain. However, we also have to bear in mind that Venezuela is our nearest neighbor, 7 miles away, and whatever happens in Venezuela of this nature will certainly have some kind of effect, and there may be some call on the people of Trinidad and Tobago to provide some aid and succor in the event that things get worse. Hopefully, it will not get to that, but we are not uninterested by Sandra.
Member for Tapkid.
Sir, given that these people, they may not be refugees, but is the government aware, or are you aware that there are a number of persons speaking Spanish who are openly working in institutions, business organizations? I'm speaking about Central Trinidad.
Venezuela.
Yeah, well, Venezuelans, Spanish-speaking individuals working. And I wonder whether you are aware whether they have work permits or not, but there are dozens of them all over Central Trinidad.
A supplemental question. Member for Superior.
Honorable Prime Minister, would you be kind enough to indicate whether these matters would be the subject of discussions when President Maduro comes to Trinidad? It's reported he's coming to Trinidad in the near future. If that is so, would these matters be part of your agenda for discussion?
I have no doubt that the visit of President Maduro on Monday, it's confirmed that President Maduro should be here either on Monday or just before Monday. And the situation in Venezuela, the economic and other situations which are the subject of this discussion would certainly form part of the conversation. I don't think he will agree with everything we're concerned about, but certainly the subject would be on the table.
Member for Chaguanas West. Member for Kamuto Manzanilla. It's supplement. The supplement. Member for Kamuto Manzanilla.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, but Honorable Member for Superior asked the question. Thank you.
Member for Caroni East.
Could the Prime Minister state whether his government intends to review the operations of the many state enterprises in an attempt to consolidate and reduce costs to the government and to the state?
Madam Speaker, if I had any doubt that my colleagues on the other side are totally insulated from what's happening in Trinidad and Tobago, a question like this and a couple others earlier on tells me that my colleagues are not paying attention. One of the first things announced in the first quarter of this government's life was the fact that we had embarked upon doing exactly this. And we selected persons with the requisite skills and experience to do this overall review. And from time to time, it has been raised about what will happen with this company or that company, and we have responded by saying that in the context of the role of that company and its future, that we will await the advice and the outcome of those who are reviewing the state enterprise sector. So the answer is yes, it is happening, and at the end of the process, the government will be in a position to determine what happens with the various state enterprises, who will be expanded, who will be curtailed, and in some instances, which ones would have outlived their usefulness.
Member for Oropouche East.
Thank you very much to the Honourable Prime Minister in terms of cost reduction. Given his statement to the member for Faizabad earlier, I'd like to ask the Prime Minister if he's aware of the statement made on the 17th of May, 3 days ago, by his Minister of Health, who indicated at page 9 of the Express, photograph riding a stationary bicycle, that the provision of healthcare to those suffering from diabetes, hypertension, lung cancer, and other NCDs costs the state more than $6 billion annually. If he's aware of that statement of the Minister of Health, and would you be reducing that cost as well?
I would not allow that as a supplemental question. Member for Caroni East.
Would the Honourable Prime Minister be in a position to indicate to the national community in terms of in the exercise you're doing now in terms of the state enterprises and your rationalization of it, where you have been able to reach and what enterprises have been considered, and with reference to the special purpose companies as well, which is fully owned by the state?
The work is going on. We are anticipating that in the not too distant future we will get initial reports on certain particular companies, because we did ask for 1 or 2 companies to be looked at in the beginning. But as of now, we are not in a position to anticipate what the team is presenting to us. But we hope that in the not too distant future we'll get the first cut on comments with respect to those companies in the state sector, many of which are drains on the exchequer.
Member for Caroni, please.
And your implementation of an economic advisory board, has that gone to the economic advisory board and also to the trade labor unions? Have you had any discussions with them based on your thinking so far?
There are two things there. One, the Economic Advisory Board is looking at the overall economic arrangements by which we manage the country. And as part of that, the joint arrangement between business, labor, and the government, that will also be taking place. And there's some dovetailing to take place along the way. And we expect that the inputs from both sides will serve us in good stead.
Tabaki.
Prime Minister, with respect to what you're saying in review of the state enterprises, particularly in Petrotrin, has any review there caused a reduction in human resources, that contracts have not been renewed and people have been sent home?
We are not aware that any action at Petrotrin is as a result of any review done in the context of this conversation. However, Petrotrin as an entity will be the subject of a major review, because the situation at Petrotrin is very serious and it requires an intervention at the level of the government, where government and labor and all the interested parties, including every citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, needs to be aware and to come up with solutions to the problem at Petrotrin. I can tell you today, the situation at Petrotrin is not a healthy one.
Tabaki.
Is the Prime Minister aware that where some contract workers have been sent home at Petrotrin, other persons have been employed, new persons to take their positions in Petrotrin?
I'm not aware of that.
Questions?
Member for Barataria, Sanwan.
To the Honourable Minister of Health, given the recent shortage of blood for surgical and hospital purposes, could the Minister indicate the measures to be taken to rectify this problem, the number of surgeries affected to date, and when will this issue be rectified?
Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the problem that has arisen is not due to a shortage of blood. It is due to a shortage of the reagents to test the blood. So there is no shortage of blood. Once the issue of the shortage of the reagents came to light, we had reagents airlifted. They reached in the country last night, and in the wee hours of this morning, they were distributed. And as I said earlier in the week, service will return to normal by Friday, and so it has. But, Madam Speaker, to put it in context, on February 4, 2014, Minister Fuad Khan is pleading for citizens to donate blood as there is a shortage in the country. On March 12, 2011, former Minister of Health, Therese Baptiste Cornelis, urged citizens to donate blood. And the problem that will reoccur, which is a global problem, is that blood banks around the world are suffering from low blood donations. In Atlanta, Los Angeles, California, elective surgeries have been postponed. And I would urge everyone in Trinidad and Tobago to do like me and get a blood donation card and become a voluntary blood donor. I myself have donated over 40 pints of blood altruistically over 15 years. And that is what we need in Trinidad and Tobago to shore up our blood supply. Thank you very much.
Member for Member for Barataria San Juan.
Madam Speaker, could I pull out my organ donation card? I have an organ.
Members, can we have some order, please? Member for Barataria San Juan. I believe the question has to do with donation of blood.
Thank you. To the Honourable Minister of Health, just one question, seeing that you have been a blood donator, etc., we put that aside. What I want to ask you is that, were you apprised of the impending shortage of reagents before it occurred? And what steps will be taken to look at that system?
Thank you. The term is not donator, the term is donor. I, as minister, became aware of it on Monday of this week. Once I became aware of it, we took steps to alleviate it. But you have raised a crucial issue. And the issue is, this should have been done before. But once I was aware of it, we took all steps, and I'm having a serious discussion with the Permanent Secretary to make sure that information reaches us on a more timely basis.
Member for Barataria San Juan, you have exhausted your supplemental questions? Yes. Member for Caroni East.
Bearing in mind, Honourable Minister, this reagent taking some time to come, and as you said, it will come. But there is a situation now where patients are waiting for blood to have their surgeries and emergency operations done. What is happening to the blood that will be required when you have no reagent to test it at the moment? Their lives are in danger.
Madam Speaker, apparently the member for Caroni East did not hear. I said that the reagents are already here. Secondly, no only elective surgeries were affected. Emergency surgeries were not affected, only elective. But it is clear that the member for Caroni East does not listen well.
Member for Barataria San Juan.
Question to the Honourable Minister of Health. Could the minister indicate the steps being taken to ensure all CDAP items and pharmaceuticals are in stock, which affects hundreds of patients?
Speaker, to contextualize, April 2015 in the Express, shortage of CDAP drugs. Newsday, August 16, 2014, Minister Khan, buy your own drugs because there were no CDAP drugs. The issue of the drug supply to Trinidad and Tobago, as the member knows, has been a perennial one. It was exacerbated in this year because you had a late election running the Constitution right down to September the 7th. Late election, late budget. Late budget, late release of funds. And pharmaceutical companies generally go on vacation in the months of January and February. Those were the facts. Drugs are now coming into the country because the orders we would have placed last year are now being delivered. However, the bigger question is that we have to rationalize the CDAP program on all drugs. Let us not forget CDAP was an invention of the People's National Movement, which they never supported. Now they are the biggest defenders of it. What we have to do, Madam Speaker, our national formulary for drugs has grown from 300 items to 1,000 items with nothing coming out of it. So we have, and the United States formulary is 257. India is 300. PAHO recommends for any country about 250 to 300. Our formulary is 1,000 drugs big. Part of the solution is to rationalize that so that all drugs for all illnesses, categories of illnesses, can be available on a continuous basis, and that is something that this administration is adhering to and will be doing.
Member for Barataria-Sanwan.
Just one simple question. How many drugs on that formulary are available for the people of Trinidad and Tobago as we speak?
Right now, theoretically, they are all available, but what you do have is duplication and triplication and quadruplication, because to treat any class of disease, you have about 5 to 10 drugs to treat one type of disease, because we have not adhered to protocols over the years to say, okay, if you are suffering from high blood pressure, use drug A and possibly drug B. What you have had is that you have had this expansion, and that expansion cost this country about $90 million a year in expired and wasted drugs, dead stock. Do you know that? That is what has been happening. So we are now going to rationalize. Thank you very much.
Last question to the Honourable Minister, Madam Speaker. Are you then saying that you are going to remove a lot of items from this CDAP list as well as the formulary? Is that what you're saying?
I am saying we are going to rationalize. So where there is duplication, triplication, and quadruplication of the same drug, we may have to look at that. It does not make sense to have 4 and 5 variants of the identical drug on your formulary. That is what I'm saying.
Questions on notice? Questions for oral answer?
Member for Chaguanas West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 89 to the Honourable Minister of Energy and Energy Industries. And welcome back from your safari.
What was that? Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Under the previous UNC government, in October 2014, a committee under the chairmanship of the then Minister of Trade, Industry, Investments and Communication was appointed to provide supervision and facilitation of the investment phase of an integrated photovoltaic park in Point Lisas. However, the project was unable to progress due to inconsistencies with the proposed budget, the deliverables, and the role of the proposed consultant. The project has since been reassigned to the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries and will be subject to an in-depth review which will determine the way forward.
Member for Chaguanas West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Could the Honourable Minister indicate as to when this in-depth review will be completed?
We have recently begun looking at all the issues related to this proposal, and well, it will naturally take some time before we can certainly go through it.
Member for Chaguanas West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Is the Minister aware that a feasibility study, an independent feasibility study was done, and in which you'd have significant diversification and the creation of jobs with this solar park at Point Lisas?
Yes, I am in fact aware that the feasibility study was done. However, because of the inconsistencies that were alluded to previously, this is why we had difficulties in progressing the project. So we are now doing an in-depth study so that we can see how we can resolve all the inconsistencies and have a project that would be feasible and profitable for the country. Thank you.
Very much. Madam Speaker, there are 28 questions on the order paper today as questions on notice, and the government will be answering 26 of them. We seek a deferral of question number 100 and question number 104 for 2 weeks, and we will answer every other question.
Leave sought is granted. Member for Oropouche West.
Question 97 to the Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Ministry of National Security has formed a specialized advisory team to design an appropriate organizational framework for the proposed Joint Border Protection Agency. The team comprises experienced professionals in the security and the management disciplines as follows. Mr. Fitzroy John, Chairman, Retired Comptroller of Customs and Excise. Mr. James Filbert, Member, Retired Commissioner of Police. Mr. Kent Moore, Member, Group Captain, Retired Commanding Officer of the Air Guard and the Coast Guard. Mr. Ramesh Lakshmidial, Member, Director General of the Trinidad and Tobago Civil Aviation Authority. Mr. Herman Brown, Member, Retired Chief Immigration Officer. The advisory team has already commenced work to fulfill its mandate, which includes developing the scope and powers of the agency and the preparation of detailed project proposals and recommendations, Madam Speaker.
Member for Couva South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question 98 to the Minister of Planning and Development.
Acting Leader of the House.
Yes, Madam Speaker, in my capacity as Acting Minister of Planning and Development, answer to Part A. The National Tripartite Advisory Council is designed to promote and encourage consensus building and democratic involvement among key stakeholders on national development issues, as well as to encourage diversification of the economy. More specifically, the terms of reference of the Council include the following, among other things. 1, to oversee the imperatives of Vision 2030. 2, to identify and review sustainable national development goals with a focus on diversification. 3, develop a culture of innovation, invention, and use of initiative. 4, enhance the level of productivity in all sectors of national endeavor. 5, develop a national campaign on productivity and proper work ethic. 6, create additional job opportunities. 7, maximize the use of science and technology. 8, focus attention on the needs of the poor, the socially displaced, and the most vulnerable in society. 9, maintain industrial peace and harmony nationally. And 10, facilitate consultations to engage the general public in discussion on the purpose, intent, and functioning of the Council and other issues as may be determined from time to time. It is expected that the Council will report to Cabinet on a regular basis on the work that it has done and on specific issues as and when required. Answer to Part B. The matter of remuneration to members of the National Tripartite Advisory Council is under review, and as such, the Council has not yet been classified within the framework of payments made to Cabinet-appointed committees, boards, and other similar bodies. This exercise is expected to be completed shortly.
Member for Point Up here.
Could the Minister, Acting Minister of Planning, state if Mr. Ansel Roger is still a member of the National Tripartite Committee?
I do not think he is a member. I think he has a representative on the committee.
Leader of the Opposition.
Madam Speaker, thank you. Question 99 has been superseded by events. This question would have been filed more than 21 days ago. No, I'm saying the question is now ocious. It was filed 21 days ago, and therefore I withdraw the question on that basis.
Member for Miaro.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Question number 102 to the Minister of Housing and Urban Development.
Minister of Housing and Urban Development.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Answer to Part A. The Housing Development Corporation presently has in its database 19 units available for allocation in the Mayaro constituency. 2 units in Coconut Grove, 4 units in Plaisance, and 13 units in Mora Heights, Rio Claro. Answer to Part B.
Information is captured in the Housing Application Fulfillment System, the HAFS, database by municipal regions. Applicants from the Mayaro constituency would therefore fall into the category for the Rio Claro Mayaro municipal region. There are 3,360 applicants registered in the Rio Claro Mayaro region. But members should note that this represents a larger area than Mayaro. Answer to Part C. There are no plans at this time to construct any additional units in the constituency of Mayaro. However, the National Construction Program of the HDC is under review, and additional units may therefore be constructed in due course once deemed feasible. Answer to Part D. As there are no plans at this time, Part D does not apply.
Member for Mayaro.
Madam Speaker, question number 103 to the Minister of Housing and Urban Development.
Minister of Housing and Urban Development.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Answer to Part A. For the period up to and including September 2016, the number of housing units to be distributed to qualifying recipients is approximately 1,200. Answer to Part B. The tentative distribution dates are within the months of May, June, July, August, and September. The exact dates have not yet been finalized. Answer to Part C. The housing estates available for occupancy include Fairfield Estate, Princestown, Gomez Trace Maruga, Cypress Hill San Fernando, Oasis Greens Enterprise, Lakeview Point Fortin, Huberstown Guapo, Pierre Road La Brea, Mora Heights Rio Claro, Plaisance Mayaro, Edinburgh South, Chaguanas, and Exchange Couva.
Member for Couva South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question 105 to the Minister of Health.
Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The question to Part A is 3,423. The question to Part B, a range of recruitment processes are being utilized as appropriate, including promotion based on performance and seniority, internal and external advertisements. The answer to Part C, the filling of vacancies is a continuous process.
Member for Tabaquite.
If I got the minister correct, he said that 3,423 vacancies in Southwest Regional Health Authority. What are the plans of the minister to ensure that opportunities for training of people to fill these vacancies are in fact accelerated, especially in the nursing profession?
What is curious about the question is that we have identified 3,423 vacancies in Southwest Regional Health Authority. The questions that should be asked, and these vacancies did not start on September the 7th, 2015. The question that should be asked is therefore, what was the plan to hire people to put in the Couva facility, which needs 2,000 people? We have a problem globally with healthcare workers, and we are doing all that we can to accelerate the training, not only for nurses, because there's a particular category of nurses that we need, that is the midwives. So we are looking at plans and working with the School of Nursing, COSTAT, to look at the whole issue of training, not only for nurses, but also for doctors, also for lab technicians, and so on. So we are doing that, Honourable Member.
Member for Kamuto Mansinilla.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Can the Honourable Minister of Health advise what are the positions that will be advertised, and will they be short-term contracts or permanent? Thank you.
Madam Speaker, it's a variety of positions from registrars, doctors, consultants, specialists, subspecialists, nurses, lab techs, and so on. So we are looking at all of those positions to see how many as possible we can fill. Thank you very much.
Member for Caroni East.
Would the Honourable Minister be able to give us some information, a further breakdown of how many nurses are included in that 3,423, and how many doctors are included in that?
Madam Speaker, that was the subject of a question which I answered in this honorable chamber about 3 weeks ago, and I gave a full breakdown. Again, if the member for Caroni East will pay attention, he will hear the answers that are given.
Member for Superior.
Minister, would you kindly indicate some of the reasons why there's such a high number of vacancies? Is it that there are not enough trained personnel, or the salaries are not attracting personnel? Some of the reasons for such a high rate of vacancies.
Thank you. It is quite amazing that they have just discovered that there are 3,000 vacancies in the health sector in South. It is quite amazing. What I can say is that we are looking at filling as many of these vacancies as humanly possible. One of the reasons, honourable member, and I answered this 3 weeks ago, there is a global shortage of doctors, there is a global shortage of nurses, and that has been said. That is why and the shortage we have is not at the level of the House officer, which I kept on saying. The shortage we have is at the level of registrars and consultants. But the member for Caroni East always harps on 150 graduates. We don't have shortages at the level of interns and house officers. All those posts on the establishment or on contract have been more or less filled. The shortages for doctors exist at the higher levels, at the level of registrars and consultants, which the junior doctors cannot fill.
For Faizabad.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 106 to the Minister of Education.
Minister of Education.
Madam Speaker, the Scholarship Selection Committee of the Ministry of Education was recently reconstituted, and the processing of applications for the United Kingdom Commonwealth scholarships and the fellowships will resume shortly. Thank you.
Member for Shogunas East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In view of the answer given by the Honourable Minister of Education that the committee has been reconstituted, will you be kind enough to tell us who comprised this committee?
Minister of Education.
Madam Speaker, I will be happy to provide that information to the Honourable Representative of Shogunas East shortly.
Member for Barataria, Sanwan.
Question number 107 to the Minister of Social Development and Family Services.
Minister of Social Development and Family Services.
Madam Speaker, the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, in keeping with its commitment to ensure the enhancement of the welfare of all persons with disabilities, became a signatory to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities on June 22, 2015. The Ministry is currently in the process of reviewing the National Policy on Persons with Disabilities to ensure conformity with the UN Convention. This review includes as a priority persons with autism. In addition, the Ministry is also preparing a policy brief which would form the basis of draft legislation to treat with persons with disabilities. At the end of these exercises, the revised national policy and the draft legislation, which will be in alignment with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, will be forwarded to Cabinet for consideration.
Member for Kabuta Manzanilla.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Honourable Minister, can you advise what is the process that will be taken in devising this policy?
Minister of Social Development and Family Services.
Madam Speaker, there is currently a national policy on persons with disabilities. What we at the Ministry are seeking to ensure is that that policy is in conformity with the UN Convention, which we have become a signatory to. So that will be the process.
Member for Barataria, San Juan.
Could the minister indicate whether that policy will take into consideration the assistance to parents for autism, as well as cerebral palsy and those types of disorders, in view of the fact that the government has decreased and stopped the unemployment relief program for those people?
Social Development and Family Services.
Madam Speaker, it is not the intention that the policy, the national policy, will treat with those issues. The ministry is, however, reviewing those matters and will be treating with those programs differently.
Member for Faizabad.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 108 to the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Following the incident, a complete review and assessment of the guidelines, protocols, process flow, staffing arrangements, equipment, and other consumables was conducted to ensure that all preventative steps were taken to eliminate the risk of a recurrence of the event. More specifically, measures to prevent a future recurrence included ensuring a safe mixture of the concentration of the cleaning agents, the safe use and drying time after application of the cleanser, the safe use of the electrosurgical machine, and ensuring that the preventative maintenance schedules for the machines were maintained according to the regulations and compliance. Further, the re-establishment of the Quality Council and the Adverse Events Committee, chaired by the Permanent Secretary, which includes the quality managers and the chief executive officers from all regional health authorities, together with the technical officers from the Ministry of Health, will continue to provide oversight in the monitoring and control of quality standards and protocols being implemented.
Member for Chaguanas West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Has there been any disciplinary proceedings instituted against persons responsible for this medical negligence?
Madam Speaker, the question presumes that there was medical negligence. The investigation will determine what was the cause, whether it was mechanical failure or negligence, and we will have due process. But I will not go on the automatic assumption that it is what Chaguanas West is alluding to.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Could the Honourable Minister indicate when this investigation of this burn in childbirth took place? Will be completed?
Thank you. Madam Speaker, in the year 2012, the Quality Council of the Ministry of Health was crucified and sacrificed and became null and void and non-functional. Not under my watch. In 2012, people left actually in disgust when they saw the way quality was going. We have reinstituted the Quality Council under the Permanent Secretary for us to have oversight. And that mechanism kicked in immediately. And I'm happy to say that the Ministry of Health now has oversight for all quality issues and adverse events.
Member for Faizabad.
Sorry, Madam Speaker, that was my question as to when the report will be available.
Yeah, exactly.
The dances are up.
The report will be available when all the investigations and due process have taken place. We are not the UNC. This is the People's National Movement. And we will follow due process. And the funding for this due process may come from the Mercedes-Benz we are going to auction, which was bought under your watch for $500,000 for a CEO of a RHA. So we will take those funds. We will take those funds when we auction a Mercedes-Benz bought under your watch and fund the investigation with that. And when we get the report, we will take action.
Member for Barataria, San Juan.
Minister of Health, could you indulge me in one last question? Could you tell? No. Could you tell me? Arrogance is not your forte, you know. You should not be so arrogant. Sorry. Yeah. What I want to ask you is that could you show this? Tell this honourable House whether there are quality assurance units in each of the regional health authorities.
There are quality assurance units in each of the RHAs, but they act independently without oversight from the Ministry of Health. So by reinstituting that Quality Council, we now have oversight. And that is crucial in managing all the RHAs because we are de-siloing the information that exists there. So the answer to your question is yes, but the Ministry of Health from 2012 abdicated its role as the oversight body for all the RHAs.
For Faizabad.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question 109 to the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Further to the escape and subsequent detention of 6 patients on March 29, 2016 at 2:15 a.m. from the Forensic Unit, Ward 27 of the St. Anne's Psychiatric Hospital, the following steps were taken to mitigate the risks to staff and patients at the St. Anne's Psychiatric Hospital by the Northwest Regional Health Authority. 1. Infrastructural upgrades. 2. Security services improvement. 3. Human resources needs. And 4. Communication with external stakeholders. The details and status of these action steps are as follows. Infrastructural. The doors located in the forensic male unit to be repaired with the most appropriate locking mechanism completed. To raise the height of the outer walls of the forensic unit with razor wire, scope of works being completed. Security services improvement. To review and reconfigure the placement of CCTV at the forensic unit. Currently, 2 cameras were replaced in upgrading the camera system in the forensic unit. To increase the security component assigned to the unit, the current complement of 4 officers and 1 K9 unit are being increased. Introduction of handheld scanners to be implemented on all staff and patients, completed and operational. Installation of electronic panic button, currently in the procurement stage. To communicate with the Ministry of National Security for the installation of police post at the forensic unit at St. Anne's Hospital. Meeting held on May 5, 2016, where it was agreed that the TT Police Service will send out patrols. Human resources needs. To review the current NWRHA complement of nursing staff assigned to the forensic unit, currently working on recruitment of registered mental nurse. Additional training of NWRH nursing staff in the area of control and restraints, currently ongoing. Communication with external stakeholders. To coordinate a meeting with the Judicial Department of Trinidad and Tobago. Key personnel to address all matters with regard to the prisoners referred from the court system. Meeting to be scheduled with the Chief Magistrate, Chief Justice, and the NWRHA. In addition to the above, it is envisaged that an inpatient secure unit will be constructed to provide evaluation and treatment of the mentally disordered offenders in a more holistic manner within an appropriate therapeutic environment.
Member for Couva South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question 110 to the Minister of Labour and Enterprise Development.
Minister of Labour and Small Enterprise Development.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity in responding to the honourable member for Couva South. I'm so happy he has missed me and summoned me again. Madam Speaker, the government has been able to use existing services provided by both government and private sector organizations to assist and provide psychological and financial guidance to newly unemployed persons. The Ministry of Labour and Small Enterprise Development, noting that newly unemployed persons go through daunting challenges, had discussions with financial institutions to adopt a more humane approach to unemployed persons with loans and mortgages. More specifically, Madam Speaker, discussions were held with the Cooperative Credit Union League, which assured that its members' operational principles and values lend themselves to such an approach. The Bankers Association of Trinidad and Tobago, we had discussions with. The Trinidad and Tobago Mortgage Finance Company Limited, the National Insurance Board, and the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago have also given their commitment to provide financial guidance and support to unemployed persons at no cost to the government of Trinidad and Tobago. Understanding that newly unemployed persons may be faced with psychosocial and emotional challenges, which may negatively affect their ability to reintegrate into the labor market and may also affect their families, government has brought together existing services offered by the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, and the Ministry of Community Development, Culture and the Arts to assist newly unemployed persons. In keeping with our theme, turning adversity into opportunity, a definite positive outcome has been the level of cross-ministerial cooperation and collaboration that has ensued. Efforts continue to be focused on ensuring that the wealth of services and support that are available are thoroughly harnessed and tapped so that persons are directed to services that are available that may not have been previously known. Madam Speaker, the Ministry has been putting systems in place to ensure that persons in need of psychological counseling are directed to appropriate services offered by the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, and the Ministry of Community Development, Culture and the Arts. With respect to financial counseling, information on persons who are newly unemployed are forwarded to relevant service providers, which include the membership of the Bankers Association of Trinidad and Tobago and the Trinidad and Tobago Mortgage Finance Company, who would proactively trigger relevant interventions. Madam Speaker, the government maintains that retrenchment and termination must be a last resort. Where undertaken, entities should ensure that employees undergo a set of transition training and self-development programs. Such programs should include entrepreneurial and personal financial planning, as well as psychosocial preparation and counseling to enable these persons to reintegrate into the labor market and continue to have a stable socio-economic life. Madam Speaker, the Ministry of Labour and Small Enterprise Development will continue to work with the wider government sector, business and labor to mitigate the psychological and financial impact that can be faced by unemployed persons and their families and provide guidance for reintegration into the labor market. Finally, Madam Speaker, the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago continues to call on the private sector, including financial institutions, trade unions, and civil society, in averting any potential job crisis and easing the burden on workers and their families. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
For Kamuto Mansinila.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Can the Honorable Minister indicate, after that comprehensive listing of stakeholders that you have conferred with, how many persons were actually counseled from this initiative?
Minister of Labour and Small Enterprise Development.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I can assure the Honourable Member for Kamuto Manzanillo that through the Job Expo that was held recently, where over 1,000 persons flowed through the Job Expo, the exact figures of what you are asking for, I cannot give at this point in time, but Madam Speaker, I can certainly provide the member for Kamuto Manzanillo at a later point in time.
But for Couva South?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My colleague asked one of the questions that I would have posed to the Honourable Minister in relation to how much workers would have received specialized, what we would call counseling. In the context of that very nice run-up you had, in relation to the number of stakeholders that you would have posed, in terms of your ongoing dialogue with them. These stakeholders, do they have specialized services as it relates to dealing with job losses and counseling services and so on? And what is their track record as it relates to dealing with workers who would have been retrenched in Trinidad and Tobago?
Minister of Labour and Small Enterprise Development.
Madam Speaker, I do believe the question that was asked, that information would be provided at a later point in time.
Member for Chaguanas East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Honourable Minister, can you state, first of all, whether the Job Expo is the same in terms of the counselling and the counselling in terms of psychological and financial, but more specifically, of those persons who would have visited your Job Expo, would have been counselled, what number of those persons would have been reintegrated into the labour market as a result of those services?
Labour and Small Enterprise.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the honourable member for Chaguanas East, the National Employment Service, under which aegis the expo was held, they are in the process of getting the data together in a comprehensive report for the attention and knowledge of the Minister of Labour.
Member for Naparima.
Could the Minister tell us whether the provision of psychological and financial counseling to newly unemployed persons will be extended to Schellenberger?
Member, is that a question?
The ArcelorMittal and Schellenberger, two companies.
Minister of Labour and Small Enterprise Development.
Madam Speaker, one has to get accustomed to childish behavior, and as a grandmother, I often face childish behavior via my grandson. Notwithstanding, Madam Speaker, all those workers who have found themselves unemployed, they are advised to contact the Ministry of Labour and Small Enterprise Development through our National Employment Services, who would then direct them to the relevant agencies which can attend to their specific concerns.
Member for Chaguanas West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in accordance with Standing Order 2910, I seek a deferral of the remaining questions on the order paper for the next sitting of the Parliament.
Member for Chaguanas West. There are about 4 minutes left, so that we will do whatever questions, and at that time, I will then entertain your request.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I was just trying to keep within the time frame.
That's understood. Member for Caroni Central.
Question number 111, Madam Speaker, to the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
No.
Member for Tabakit.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 114 to the Honourable Minister of Works and Transport.
Minister of Works and Transport.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Trinidad and Tobago Express and the Trinidad and Tobago Spirit move approximately 1 million passengers and just over 200,000 vehicles annually. Each vessel offers a minimum of 1 round trip per day, Sundays to Saturdays. On the identified peak days of the week, additional sailings are scheduled. The year-built, so-called, of these vehicles are 1997 and 2002, respectively, with their ages between or being 19 years and 14 years, respectively. The Trinidad and Tobago Express commenced operations on the inter-island route on December the 11th, 2006, while the Trinidad and Tobago Spirit commenced operations on June the 8th, 2007. It is to be noted that the vessels would have experienced both normal and extraordinary wear and tear during their deployment. However, in spite of the age of the vessels and the said wear and tear, the current fleet has proven to be safe, reliable, and stable since 2005. The government stands committed to provide an efficient and effective inter-island ferry service for the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. The Port Authority of Trinidad and Tobago will continue with its routine maintenance program and scheduled statutory dry dockings with the view to achieving dependable, functional vessels to achieve this end. It should also be noted that the Port Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, as a responsible agent of the government for the inter-island ferry service, has developed contingency plans to address any unforeseeable contingencies that may arise during standard operations. For example, the Trinidad and Tobago Spirit was recently booked for 2 round trips on April the 25th, 2016 to facilitate the influx to the sister isle of Tobago for the annual Jazz Festival. Between the night of Sunday, April 24th, 2016 and the morning of Monday, April 25th, 2016, the vessel experienced engine trouble, resulting in the functioning of 3 engines instead of the regular 4. The loss of the engine meant less speed and a longer sailing time for the vessel. In an effort to ensure that none of the passengers were adversely affected, the following measures were implemented. The TNT Spirit made 1 trip instead of 2. The water taxi, which is operated by NIDCO, was enlisted to transport 300 passengers. The Warrior Spirit was used to bring most of the vehicles back to Port of Spain, and the MV Superfast Galatia and the Trinidad and Tobago Express accommodated the remaining passengers. Additionally, Madam Speaker, I am to inform this Honourable House that a comprehensive proposal is at present being developed with respect to acquiring 2 replacement fast ferry catamarans in the medium to long term to replace these aging vessels that are currently operating the Sea Bridge. It is the intention that these replacement vessels will surpass the present specifications and capacities of the current fleet. May I also inform this Honourable House, Madam Speaker, that the government has enunciated in its 2015 manifesto pledge, which is now official government policy, will explore the possibility of establishing a new port in Toko, thus providing a faster alternative sea route to and from Tobago. This initiative is in the preliminary stages, and further details will be revealed to the citizenry and this Honourable House in due course. I thank you.
Honourable members, in accordance with Standing Order 2910, the whip has indicated a desire that the unanswered questions be postponed to a later sitting, so that all unanswered questions shall be answered at the next sitting of this House.
Requests for leave to move the adjournment of the House on definite matters of urgent public importance.
Leader of the Opposition.
I hereby seek your leave to move the adjournment of the House today under Standing Order 17 for the purpose of discussing a definite matter of urgent public importance, namely the failure of government to curb the unacceptable increasing number of murders in Trinidad and Tobago. The matter is definite because it pertains to the failure of government to curb the unacceptable increasing number of murders in TNT. The matter is urgent because the failure of government to curb the increasing number of murders is resulting in more and more murders being committed each day, as is evident from the fact that within the last several days, 15 persons have been slaughtered, with even more murders being reported today, bringing the murder count for the year to an unprecedented 181 persons. And Madam Speaker, when I send this to you, that was the number. I'm being told that another murder has occurred, and in fact, the reports are now of 183 persons having been murdered for the year. The matter is of public importance because the increasing number of murders is engendering widespread fear and concern in our country, and is also damaging the international reputation of Trinidad and Tobago. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Honourable members, I am not satisfied that this matter... Members? Honourable member for Couva South, I am certain you did not intend what you just did. Honourable members, I am not satisfied that this matter qualifies under this standing order. I advise that the member pursue this matter under Standing Order 16.
Statements by ministers.
The Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, on April 22nd, 2016, Standard & Poor's rating agency lowered its long-term foreign and local currency sovereign credit rating for Trinidad and Tobago from A to A-. It is to be noted that this is still 4 notches above the speculative grade and is still a good investment rating. Madam Speaker, the lowering of our rating was primarily due to a sharp fall in energy sector revenues, which has contributed to lower fiscal revenues and decreased foreign reserves. However, Madam Speaker, it is noteworthy that Standard & Poor's made the point, and I quote, "Economic contraction combined with loose fiscal policy during an election year contributed to a reported central government fiscal deficit of 1.5% of GDP. The underlying erosion in public finances was worse, as the previous government incurred substantial payment arrears estimated at around 2.4% of GDP. As a result, net general government debt increased towards 27% of GDP in 2015. The current account balance slipped to a deficit of 0.5% of GDP in 2015 after being in surplus in the previous years, excepting 2012. The previous government's heavy borrowing from the central bank prior to the election resulted in sharply curtailed liquidity in the financial system, reflecting poor debt management. That is a direct quote from Standard & Poor's. This is not PNM. Standard & Poor's went on to say, and again, I quote, "After coming into office in September 2015, the new People's National Movement, PNM government, took initial steps to staunch the rapid deterioration of public finances that had taken place before the election." I am quoting. "The new government introduced revenue measures, including value-added tax reforms, cuts in costly energy subsidies, and imposed better control over discretionary spending. The new government has also allowed for moderately more flexibility in the exchange rate in the context of diminished export earnings." Madam Speaker, notwithstanding the new approach to fiscal discipline on the part of the new government, Standard & Poor's made the point that Trinidad and Tobago's public finances are vulnerable to a prolonged and substantial drop in energy revenues. The energy sector contributed more than half of total government revenues during the boom years, around 35% of revenues in fiscal 2014-2015, or 11% of GDP, and is likely to contribute only 27% of fiscal revenues in fiscal year 2015-2016, or 7% of GDP. Successful implementation of timely fiscal reforms, along with a gradual recovery and economic growth, is needed to stabilize the economy. Over the medium term, Standard & Poor's expects the deficit to narrow gradually and to turn to a surplus of 2.3% of GDP in 2019, assuming a modest recovery in energy prices and output volume. Recent depreciation of the exchange rate should also boost net exports. The ratings also reflect the government's significant external assets invested abroad. The assets accumulated from high energy sector revenues during the boom years sustain its external position and contain its net debt burden. We project that the public sector and the financial sector will remain in a strong net external asset position within the next 3 years. Since much of the public sector's debt is locally funded, reducing the risk of a sudden loss of access to external markets. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Personal explanations, introduction of bills, motions relating to the business or sittings of the House, and moved by a minister, public business, committee business, motions.
The member for Digo Martin, Northeast.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Be it resolved that this House adopt the report of the Joint Select Committee on the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Amendment Bill 2015. Madam Speaker, all members would have been sent some time ago a report of the Joint Select Committee on the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Amendment Bill. In fact, this was laid in this Parliament some time ago. If I can briefly give some information on what has transpired with this committee. The committee was established in November 2015, and its purpose was to consider and report on a bill entitled the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Amendment Bill 2015, and to report by January 22nd, 2016. And the following persons were members of the committee: myself, Ms. Sherry-Ann Critchlow-Coburn, Mr. Adrian Lyons, Dr. Bhoendradatt Tewarie, Mr. Franklin Can, Mrs. Paula Gopi-Schoon, Mr. Wayne Sturge, Mr. David Small. Madam Speaker, I would say that by and large, most people attended, although I do not recall Mr. Sturge attending at all. Not once. I don't recall. He may have. I'm subject to correction, but I don't think he turned up once. Madam Speaker, I was elected to be chairman of the committee, and we were supported by the clerk of the House and other officers of the Parliament, and very well supported, I might say. We did our work in very short order. We were a very efficient committee, Madam Speaker. We held 5 meetings in December, 1 in December, 2 in January, and 2 in February, and we were able to complete our work, Madam Speaker, in February, and reported to the House in, let's see exactly when we reported, Madam Speaker. We reported to the House early in the year. Madam Speaker, we received submissions, we invited submissions, and we received submissions from the private sector, civil society group, from Mr. Hamill-Smith, from Mr. Affa Raymond, from the insurance brokers of Trinidad and Tobago, and from the board of permanent secretaries. Most of the submissions, however, Madam Speaker, related to the Parent Act and were beyond the scope of the committee. We met with the representatives of the private sector civil society group and permitted them to make a short presentation of their comments on the amending bill. This was in February of 2016, and a presentation was made on behalf of the group by Mr. Winston Riley. Based on the discussions with the technical team and the private sector group, the committee identified a number of areas for review. These included the process for removal of the procurement regulator in relation to the possibility of the regulator trading with the government. By that is meant entering into a contract with the government or providing goods and services for the government. Secondly, we also looked at the ability of board members, not just the regulator, to trade with the government. The procedure for making regulations in relation to the functioning of the board, operational matters. The procedure for making regulations with respect to the disposal of state land. We noted that the Parent Act did not address the disposal of state land and real property owned by the government, state enterprise, or statutory body. And we acknowledge that the amending bill would have some overlap with respect to the disposal of lands under the Minerals Act, and that when we are drafting regulations, we would have to take note of that. Madam Speaker, the report was laid as a House paper, and if I can now go into some of the salient issues. If we go to the back of the report, Madam Speaker, the original bill was a short bill. It had just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, just a total of 7 clauses and 1 schedule. The first clause was simply the short title, well, the title, the long title. The second clause was interpretation. The third clause was a clause to introduce a provision whereby if the regulator was found to have traded with the government without the approval of Parliament, that a process would then be initiated to examine this issue and determine whether the regulator should be removed for entering into contractual relations with the state. During our deliberations, we decided to delete this, to remove this provision, which would have required the appointment of a tribunal and would have been quite a long and drawn-out process. And we simply added to existing provisions in the legislation the provision among all of the others in Section 12 of the Parent Act that if the regulator has traded with the government without the prior approval of the minister, that would be a reason for the appointment of the regulator to be terminated. So we simplified it. And as we went on, we also made that provision applicable to members of the regulatory body, so that if a member trades with the government while holding office, or he becomes party to or is partner to a firm or a director or manager of a company which to his knowledge becomes a party to any contract with the government for on behalf of the public service, that again would be a reason for members of the regulatory body to be removed. The purpose of this amendment bill, Madam Speaker, was simply to deal with certain amendments that we on this side thought were very important and very necessary to allow for the proper functioning of the Procurement Act, which we had submitted to the then government during the previous deliberations on the Act, and which the government at the time had chosen not to accept. But we thought it was important. For example, we think it is absolutely important that the report coming from the regulator, which is in Section 24 of the Parent Act, which states that the regulator shall submit his reports annually to the Speaker of the House and of the House of Representatives, the President of the Senate, and the Minister. We thought we should make it crystal clear that these reports should be referred forthwith to the Public Accounts Committee, a suggestion that the previous government had chosen not to agree with. so that the democratic process can ensue, and the Public Accounts Committee, by way of the Constitution, is chaired by a member of the opposition in this House. So we felt if we made it crystal clear that the reports of the regulator of procurement that are laid in the House are referred forthwith to the Public Accounts Committee, then the democratic process could only be enriched, because it would mean that the opposition would be able to examine the reports of the procurement regulator. We didn't understand why, when we made these suggestions, when we were in opposition, that the government rejected them out of hand. In Section 5 of the Amendment Act, we dealt with a tidying up matter where if the regulator had suspended procurement proceedings, and then had made a decision with respect to what it did, what it intended to do with a procurement matter, that the suspension should be lifted immediately. We felt it should not be discretionary, so that a tender process may have been suspended by the regulator and could be left in limbo unless we made it crystal clear that as soon as the regulator makes his decision, the suspension of the procurement proceedings would be lifted. So that was Section 5 of the amendment bill. And again, we could not understand why a simple provision like that, designed to remove ambiguity, could have created so much confusion on the other side when they were in government. Section 6 of the amendment, Clause 6 of the amendment bill, we thought to be fundamental, where we introduced the concept of a public procurement review board established to review decisions made by the procurement office. And this review board shall comprise a retired judge who shall be the chairman, a registered engineer with at least 10 years experience in matters relating to procurement, and a chartered accountant or quantity surveyor with at least 10 years experience in matters relating to procurement. This clause in the bill created some discomfort for the lone opposition member who chose to attend the meetings. This would have been the member for Caroni Central. Created some discomfort. The honourable member did not seem to see why this was necessary. But for the benefit of the honourable member and all members, if one simply looks at the civil proceedings rules, and you look at the overriding objective of the civil proceedings rules, 1998, of the Supreme Court of Trinidad and Tobago, one sees that the overriding objective of our rules of court is to avoid litigation and to lead the parties towards a settlement. Yes, and I nearly finished my second one. And to lead the parties towards a settlement so that they would not have to engage in a lot of costly and time-consuming and acrimonious litigation. That is the overriding objective of the civil proceedings rules. And more, Madam Speaker, I see judges in Trinidad and Tobago seeking to implement that overriding objective and sending matters for mediation and sending matters for settlement and asking parties to agree on a settlement outside of the court process, all in furtherance of avoiding expense and avoiding unnecessary and costly litigation. And this review board, Madam Speaker, is intended to do precisely that, because it would be a non-adversarial setting. It would be a situation where you have three experts. As I said, one is a retired judge, one is an experienced engineer, and the other one is an experienced accountant or quantity surveyor. And these members of the review board would be appointed by the President after consultation with the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition. And the function of this review board would be to review decisions made by the regulator. Because you see, Madam Speaker, this new regime that we are all committed to, and I want to say we're all committed to, we on this side and members on the other side. This new regime, this new procurement regime that we are all committed to, will have a profound effect on the implementation of the development program of Trinidad and Tobago. Quite apart from weeding out corruption, improving transparency, introducing accountability, value for money, and all of these laudable objectives, which we are all committed to, it will also have a profound effect on the capital development program of Trinidad and Tobago and the physical development of our country. So we thought that since the procurement regulator was being given such wide powers as he is being given in the Procurement Act, that it was necessary, if the procurement regulator made a decision to stop a tender process, suspend tenders, overturn contract award, and so on, which could have the effect of scuttling a large project. And you know, if this was in place a couple of years ago, and there was a proper regulator in place, I dare say a lot of projects would have been scuttled. I dare say, because they did not follow the established procurement rules. But the fact is that this regulator will have tremendous power. He can decide yay and he can decide nay. He can decide if a project goes ahead or a project stops. He can overturn contract awards done by state enterprises, ministries, and other procurement agencies. So we felt that in this situation, there was be a natural tendency for aggrieved persons to want to approach the court if they were not satisfied with the decision of the procurement regulator. And as a result, we put an intermediate oversight mechanism in place to seek to settle matters before they got into the court process, where they could be stuck for many, many, many years. And the whole point is that there's an initial review based on a complaint by an aggrieved party. When the regulator makes a decision with respect to an award of a contract or process, there's an initial complaint process where the aggrieved party can complain to the regulator, standard practice. And then the regulator will consider the complaint and the circumstances and make a decision. So we felt that a person already having complained to the regulator and not received satisfaction, and then the review board comes in and the person has an opportunity again to make a complaint or an appeal, as you may call it, to the review board. And again, in a situation where the regulator had looked at an appeal and had said no, and then the review board had looked at the regulator's decision and again had upheld the decision and had said they cannot support the appeal. That was two opportunities for an aggrieved party to have their complaint heard, and we felt this would minimize the number of matters would find their way into the court, because the person has already been dealt with twice, dealt with by the procurement regulator and dealt with by the review board. So it would filter out all of the frivolous matters in the system, and only the genuine grievances would go to the court. And Madam Speaker, this practice is used in several countries in the world, and it recognizes that, you know, the overriding objective of the judicial system is to try to avoid matters going to litigation and try to avoid expense and delay. And Madam Speaker, let me just put this all into context now. And people need to understand this. The law as it now stands does not allow courts to review the procurement decisions of state enterprises and other similar bodies unless the aggrieved person can show gross irrationality or fraud. So at this point in time, Madam Speaker, if someone is aggrieved by a decision of a state enterprise like NIPDEC or NIDCO or UDICOT, and that person wants to invite the court to review its decision making with respect to a tender and an award of a contract, the court will not intervene in the process unless there are what is called sufficient public law elements in the process. It will not intervene unless fraud is the cause of action, Madam Speaker. And this has been tested in many jurisdictions. It has been tested in Trinidad and Tobago, famous cases. You have NH International versus Udicot. No, it's a famous case. It's a famous case, and it established the law. And it's interesting that arising from that case, where NH International felt aggrieved over the award of a contract by Udicot with respect to a particular government project, it's interesting. The law was tested both in the High Court and in the Court of Appeal. And in both instances, both the High Court and the Court of Appeal, the court determined that there were insufficient public law elements, that Udicot was a state enterprise and was entitled to act commercially, and that the court was not entitled to put itself in the shoes of the decision makers at Udicot in that particular instance, and not entitled to second guess the decisions of the evaluation committee unless fraud could have been established. And that is the law of Trinidad and Tobago as it now stands. It's a Court of Appeal decision. I think the judges were Kangaloo, Warner, and Sharma. Yeah. So, flowing from that decision, believe it or not, Madam Speaker, came a big push from the construction industry for us to change our procurement regime. And that is, in fact, for those who don't know it, that case and that decision in that case, that state enterprises are not amenable to judicial review with respect to procurement matters unless fraud can be shown or gross irrationality, that irregularities and so on. That is what led to the initiative by the construction sector, by the JCC and all these bodies for a change in the law. That was the catalyst, that was the impetus for the whole thing. Because that is the law as it stood. And I remember another case, a case of the overpass, the Uriah Butler overpass and Justice Mark Mohammed. And that case took 6 years. 6 years. And that was a situation where the state enterprise, it might be the same Udicot, yeah, it might be the same Udicot, had awarded a contract with respect to the construction of the overpass at the intersection of Uriah Butler and Churchill Roosevelt highways, and an aggrieved party took Udicot to court. And Justice Mark Mohammed, the decision took a long time. It took 6 years. And he relied upon... No, that was under your time. That was UNC. That was UNC. That was John Humphrey, the famous John Humphrey. And one of the aggrieved parties, I believe it was Pancrete, took Udicot to court because they felt aggrieved and felt they should have received the contract for that overpass, but they didn't get it. And Justice Mark Mohammed eventually relied on Canadian law. And it's interesting because throughout the Commonwealth, throughout common law jurisdictions that derive their legal system from English law, whether it is Canada, or whether it is Australia, or New Zealand, whether it is England itself, the law is consistent throughout the Commonwealth. And Justice Mark Mohammed, as he was then, made a similar decision that the procurement decisions of state enterprises are not amenable to judicial review unless there's fraud or gross irregularity. So this has led us to where we are today. And we all have to understand what we are doing. Because by the Procurement Act, the past Procurement Act and now these amendments, we are now for the first time, and I want to repeat, for the first time, introducing public law elements into the procurement system in Trinidad and Tobago. By establishing a system where tender rules will be made by a procurement regulator and published and enter into the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, whether by way of subsidiary legislation or not, We are now entering into the realm of public law. And when this is all said and done, and the Office of the Procurement Regulator is established, and staffed, and equipped, and the regulator publishes tender rules now for use in Trinidad and Tobago, for the first time, aggrieved contractors and suppliers of goods and services will be able to ask the court to review the procurement decisions of state enterprises and statutory authorities for the first time, because prior to that there were insufficient public law elements within our procurement system in state enterprises. So we all have to understand what we are doing. Now for the first time, the High Court and the Court of Appeal can look into the tender, tenders and the awards made by state enterprises. And this is why we have to be extremely careful. And this is another reason why we felt that before people get to court, we needed to weed out the frivolous cases and leave only the genuine grievances to go to court. And this is one of the reasons why we felt it absolutely necessary, as other countries have, to introduce a review board. In addition, Madam Speaker, so let's go back now to the report, and let's go back and look and see at what we are doing. So we are creating this review board. Again, I said a judge, experienced engineer, experienced quantity surveyor, and so on. And the same conditions will apply to removal of a member of the review board as it would apply to the regulator, with a few minor changes. And a procuring entity or any other person who is entitled to be given an opportunity to make representations may request the review board to review the order or decision of this will be the procurement office that it has made under the Act. A request for review shall be made within 21 days of the making of the order by the procurement regulator. And we're not limiting the person's right, if they feel aggrieved, after the whole convoluted process. Well, I won't call it convoluted. This whole detailed process to go to court. But the fact is that an aggrieved person, a person who is aggrieved at a decision by the procurement regulator with respect to a contract, must make his complaint within 21 days. So that is something, again, we're borrowing from the English system, where you have a system of adjudication, which we don't have in Trinidad and Tobago. There's an Adjudication Act in England, and a whole list of adjudicators, and they perform the function of the review board that we have here. So you have very highly qualified people, whether they are lawyers or construction industry professionals, and they are given very short time frames, the same 21 days, to adjudicate on a dispute coming out of a procurement process within the British system. But that's a very regulated and very regimented regime, and we are far, far away from that. We don't have the number of personnel in Trinidad and Tobago that are specialized in procurement law and so on, to have a list of adjudicators. But it's something we need to consider as a country in the future, because it deals specifically with construction, and the decisions of the adjudicators in England are binding until overturned by a court. So it gives the industry a chance to breathe. You go and make a complaint, an adjudicator comes in, within 21 days he makes a decision, and that decision stands until or unless overturned by a court. So in this particular case, we are saying an aggrieved person must make their complaint, request for review, within 21 days of the decision of the procurement regulator. And then we give the review board the power to dismiss a request for a review if it is of the opinion the request is frivolous or vexatious. And again, Madam Speaker, this is borrowing from an amendment that we made to the Integrity in Public Life Act back in 2010. And I think you know something about this, that prior to that, the Integrity Commission had no choice but to deal with complaints before it. It did not have the option to dismiss complaints if they felt they were frivolous or vexatious. They had to go through the whole process of an inquiry and investigation. And that was counterproductive and just made no sense. So again, in this case, borrowing from that experience, the review board may dismiss a request if it believes it's frivolous or vexatious. It's then required, when they're dealing with substantive complaints, to conduct a review within 21 days of receiving the complaint. The parties to the review or complaint shall be the person who requests the review, the relevant procuring entity, that will be a state enterprise or some such thing, and any other person who has an interest in the matter. And the review board shall complete its review within 28 days of receiving the request for review. So, Madam Speaker, in this particular case, the review board is tightly constrained. The person who is aggrieved must make their complaint within 3 weeks, and the review board must complete its work and make a decision within 4 weeks. And the review board can confirm, vary, or overturn the decision of the procurement office and order the payment of costs and so on. And a party who does not like what the review board did can appeal that decision to the High Court within 28 days of making the decision. Finally, Madam Speaker, a very, very important part. In the previous act, for reasons best known to the previous government, they left out state lands. Totally out. The disposal of state lands. We don't know why. We don't know why. We suspect why, but we don't know why. So that the disposal of valuable state lands was left out of the procurement system. And we will have none of that. So we have put it back in. And I think any fair-minded person will agree that there must be scrutiny of the disposal of state lands. Can't have a situation where we're bringing in a sophisticated new procurement system to look at tenders for goods and services and box drains and leave out something like the disposal or the lease of Invaders Bay, for example, which I'm told is worth $1 billion. Can no longer countenance such a situation. So the procurement regulator will have authority to look at situations such as the attempted lease of the lands at Invaders Bay. So the new clause would be, notwithstanding the State Lands Act and any other written law to the contrary, the minister may make regulations in respect of the disposal of state lands, real property owned by the government, real property owned by state enterprises, and real property owned by a statutory body, responsibility for which is assigned to a minister of government, Madam Speaker. So this brings us in. And you see, Madam Speaker, there's tremendous confusion and lack of knowledge in this particular area. And the Invaders Bay matter is a particular point. Because when I saw what was going on with Invaders Bay, and I saw the then Minister of Trade, what was it, Minister of Trade, going hell-bent on proceeding to dispose of these valuable lands, $1 billion worth of property belonging to the people of this country, in clear breach, in my opinion, of the Central Tenders Board Act, which does not allow that to take place. I knew this thing was going to lead to trouble, and it did. It ended up in court, and the court has ruled that this was a breach, and has ordered, and in fact we now have to deal with this. Yeah. We now have to deal with the order of the court that we have to disclose. The court ordered the minister at the time to disclose the legal advice he had received on the matter. He did not disclose it. And we know it falls to us, the PNM government, to deal with that. Whether to continue the appeal or whether to withdraw, we're not sure at this point what we're going to do. But all of that came out of tremendous ignorance, I'll have to say, not in a bad way, I'm using the English meaning of the word, ignorance of the law and the processes of the law. That once the Central Tenders Board Act makes it clear that the government, when it is acting in a manner to enter into contractual arrangements with a third party, that the Central Tenders Board must get involved unless you utilize Section 20 of the CTB Act and utilize a state enterprise such as NIPDEC or UDICOT, as the case may be. There's a tremendous misunderstanding of this whole thing, and a clear misunderstanding, as I saw it with my own eyes, of the previous administration. I think they don't even understand what happened yet. I recall there was also an attempt to tender for a railway system. I remember seeing an ad in the papers where there was an attempt to tender for a railway system without you going through the Central Tenders Board and without going through a state enterprise under Section 21A of the CTB Act. And there's a lot of misunderstanding and confusion about the powers of a government, what a government can do and what a government cannot do. And I'm now hearing this problem also arose with the judicial complexes, with a complete misunderstanding on the part of the former Minister of Justice of his authority and his powers and so on. But this new system will get rid of all of that ambiguity, one would hope. So it will now be apparent that procurement entities, whether it is the Ministry of Works, as the case may be, whether it is UDICOT, whether it is the Tourism Development Company or whatever, Ministry of Health, that they will now have to follow proper procurement procedures, follow the law to the letter. Otherwise, they will find themselves in the hands of the High Court. And let me know, how much more time do I have? To the initial 30. Oh, I'm doing the whole thing? So how much more time do I have? 10 minutes? No problem, that's enough time. So my time goes straight through. Straight through. Okay, no problem. Madam Speaker, I think it's time for me to give an example of the mistakes made in the past. And I will deem it as a mistake. Other people may not view what I'm about to read as a mistake. But I will deem it as a mistake. And I'll put it down to ignorance on the part of the persons who did this, as the persons who tried to divest the country of Invaders Bay and so on, just didn't know what they were doing. Madam Speaker, I received a report just recently. Ministry of Finance Investments Division Central Audit Committee, report of the Central Audit Committee on the audit into the operations of the National Health Card Program, Ministry of Health's National Health Card Program. And Madam Speaker, when one reads this, as I said, you're going to see a series of errors made by the former administration. The National Health Card, Madam Speaker, was awarded to a company by the name of Infotech.
Elections.
Yeah, well, I don't know what it was for. It was awarded to a company by the name of Infotech. And when I read this report, and these are not my words, Madam Speaker, I'm reading what the Central Audit Committee has told me. And the Central Audit Committee has said that following the decision of Cabinet to award a contract to the National Insurance Property Development Company for a system upgrade of the current CDAP IT solution, the Ministry of Health, and I'm reading Section 10.3.1 of the report, reference was also made to the Ministry of Health statement with respect to Cabinet's decision of the award to NIPDEC, and stated at the meeting, the Ministry of Health instructed NIPDEC to engage Infotech Caribbean Limited despite the many challenges highlighted at the meeting. Approval was also sought to engage Infotech on a sole selective basis. It goes on to say that the ministry argued that the reason why Infotech should be given the contract on a sole selective basis, and this is a $40 million contract, that it is reasonable that an upgrade to the current CDAP solution is required to facilitate the above-mentioned cabinet mandate. Based on the foregoing, the ministry requests that NIPDEC indicate whether the current application is a bespoke solution. If it is a bespoke solution, it is reasonable to assume the provider would be best placed to provide an upgrade of that solution. So there already was a CDAP system in place that Infotech was managing. And the Ministry of Health told NIPDEC that because this was an upgrade of the system, it was appropriate to award it, the new system, to Infotech on a sole selective basis, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in accordance with this, the NIPDEC proceeded to invite a proposal from Infotech, despite the fact that the Central Audit Committee says now that it was irrelevant whether the existing IT application system was bespoke, as the new system was to be designed separately and apart from that system and to replace it. The old system was not to be upgraded with the new system. The new system has no interface with the old system. The new registration, pharmacy, and reporting applications were all to be custom built and tailored to the needs of the client. So what Central Audit is telling us is that Ministry of Health's decision that because there was a CDAP IT system in place being run by Infotech, this new system, this $40 million contract, was just an upgrade, so give it to them. And what Central Audit is saying is that this was not an upgrade. It was a completely new system. Thus, Central Audit Committee concluded the goods did not form part of a system already in use, nor were they replacement parts of a system already in use, as they related to the provision of a completely new IT requirement. So, despite that, the Ministry instructed NIPDEC to go ahead and give this contract to Infotech. And here we have now what are the results. A sole select tendering method was utilized by NIPDEC, as I said, on the instructions of the Ministry of Health. The tender committee met in March 2014, evaluated the tender, and deemed it to be non-responsive. Deemed it to be non-responsive because there was a mistake between words and figures. We could say that that is a small error. It also said Infotech proposed a joint venture consortium between itself and Resonance Trinidad Limited, but no formal documents were presented to indicate that this was so. So the NIPDEC Tenders Committee rejected the sole tender from Infotech on the grounds that it was not responsive to the request for proposals and it was not compliant. You know what happened after that? You know what happened after that, Madam Speaker? They were instructed to do it again. And they were instructed to do it again by sole selective. Do it the same way and do it again. And what is very, very curious about all of this, Madam Speaker, that the Central Audit Committee found it astonishing that Infotech, in its second submission, was able to correct every single discrepancy in its first submission as if it had in its possession the tender evaluation report from NIPDEC. These are the actual words of the Central Audit Committee, Madam Speaker. $40 million. And the Central Audit Committee has concluded that there was no valid basis to reclassify the proponent from non-responsive to responsive, because that is what they were told to do. Reclassify the tender from non-responsive to responsive. And the Central Audit Committee goes on to say, Infotech was given an unfair advantage to submit another proposal for the same service after having been validly deemed to be non-responsive upon opening of the first proposal. This was inconsistent with NIPDEC tender rules and regulations and the request for proposals, and a similar opportunity was not afforded to other proposals during NIPDEC's initial open tender for the provision of information technology solution under the old CDAP system. And they go on and on and on. I would need about an hour to go into this. But the bottom line is, Madam Speaker, that the Ministry of Health ordered NIPDEC to award a contract to Infotech by sole selective award in complete breach of NIPDEC's tender rules for $40 million. The proposal was found to be non-compliant and non-responsive, and they said, do it again. And what Central Audit finds so mysterious is that how come when Infotech did it again, they were able to, as if they were point by point, and this is not my words, point by point. And Central Audit actually says they have no idea how Infotech was able to do that. But it is obvious that they had access to the internal workings at NIPDEC. And this, and the point I'm making in all of this, Madam Speaker, is this is the kind of travesty that we want to put an end to. This is the kind of travesty we want to put an end to. Because a court cannot interfere into that unless you were able to determine fraud. But now, under the new procurement rules, a court could deal with that, a regulator could deal with that, a review board could deal with that. And I've just given one example, Madam Speaker. $40 million given to a company, sole selective, that did not have the resources, that did not have the capability, that did not have the capacity. They were instructed by the Ministry of Health to give this sole selective award to this company, and NIPDEC's own committee said this proposal is non-responsive and non-compliant, and they were told do it again. I beg to move, Madam Speaker.
Honourable members, I will now propose the question for debate. Be it resolved that this House adopt the report of the Joint Select Committee on the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Amendment Bill 2015. The member for Caroni Central.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. This is a good opportunity to speak to the amendments brought by the Minister of Finance through the Joint Select Committee report that has been laid here and which we are debating today. There are some issues which the Minister of Finance raised, which I will address, because not everything that he said was accurate. But before I do that, I want to address the issue that he spent a fair amount of time on with regard to the amendment. And with regard to the amendment, and that has to do with the review tribunal. This report is a report of the Joint Select Committee on Procurement, and the amendments that we have are really amendments to the parent bill. And as the Minister indicated, I sat as a member of that committee, and I participated in it, in the work of the committee, and on the basis of a committee working and functioning together, we were able to make certain modifications which came as part of the report. But the one matter on which the Minister of Finance insisted was the review tribunal. And this is a matter on which I have consistently taken a different position, beginning with the presentation of what became Act Number 1 of 2015, which is the parent bill to these amendments. And Madam Speaker, I wish to read into the records of this House what I said about the proposed amendments having to do with the review tribunal, because I think it is important, because I made the case in committee and it was not seriously taken into account. And it is not fair to say that the tribunal, the review tribunal proposed, will prevent matters from going to court, because ultimately anyone who is aggrieved in a situation will have the opportunity to go to court. So it's not going to present the court option from being exercised by any aggrieved party. That's the first thing. The other issue is that these matters having to do with review are done in addition to what is included in the parent legislation, the procurement legislation, which we brought to both houses and passed. And more than that, the review tribunal raises serious issues that have to do with the extent to which such a parallel institution is going to interfere with the conduct of the work of the procurement regulator and the authority that he is given under the parent legislation. I also wish to say that the reference that the minister made to the process by which contracts disputes are resolved in England have to do with contracts after they are awarded. And they have to do with monies being disbursed, and they have to do with dispute resolution as to the elements of contract execution. They do not have to do with the procurement process. The second issue is that the minister did not mention at all that when he argued his case in committee, he argued his case in committee on the basis of Kenyan legislation, legislation from Kenya. And therefore, I wish to address that issue by reading into the record what I wrote to him through the secretary of the committee on this particular matter. The proposed amendment is Clause 6 of an Act to amend the Public Procurement and Disposal of Property Act 2015. And it calls for the establishment of a procurement review board to review decisions made by the Office of the Procurement Regulator. This board is to be appointed by the President after consultation with the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition. And therefore, this board is appointed in the same manner as the procurement regulator and the other regulators holding office under the parent law itself. It is this group of adjudicators on the review board are in fact proposed, it is proposed that they be appointed in the very same way. It is my view that given the intention of the parent legislation and the structure of relationships in the parent legislation, there is absolutely no need for a review board. Establishment of a review board will create a parallel institution. It will undermine the function of the procurement regulator. It will add another unnecessary layer of bureaucracy, and yet leave the court as the final arbiter in the case of continued dissatisfaction on the part of the person or entity asking for review. In the argument in support of this conclusion outlined below, reference is made to the Public Procurement Administrative Review Board Draft Procedure Manual, which outlines the role and function of the Administrative Review Board in Kenya, and which was circulated by the chairman to support the proposed amendment for a review board. This is the letter which I wrote to him because of the matters which came before the committee. And these are the issue. This is how I examine the issue. A review board for the purpose of adjudication in instances of dispute or challenge to a decision or process of arriving at a decision on procurement seems reasonable on the face of it, but may only rationally be deemed reasonable when framework and context are examined. Given that one of the arguments for establishment of a review board put forward so far is that a review board will nullify the need for costly and lengthy judicial processes, which the minister raised there again, which can have the effect of bringing urgent and necessary government projects to a halt, an argument which he made again here. I take this opportunity to point out that the example of the Kenyan model makes it abundantly clear that whatever the decision of the review board, any party involved in the dispute still has the clear option of pursuing the matter of the review board decision in court. The challenger, therefore, is not bound by the review board process. In the draft procedure manual circulated, it makes it clear on page so-and-so that the right to review, under the right to review, that the right to request a review in addition to any legal remedy a person may have. So the person always has the legal remedy, and therefore it does not in any way prevent or avoid litigation. It is important to note that the review process already exists in the 2015 legislation, and I will refer to that, and offers any aggrieved party exactly the same options. So the question is, why have a second layer of bureaucracy? The process is outlined in Part 5, Challenge Proceedings, clauses 49, 50, 51, and 52, on pages 36 to 41 of Act Number 1 of 2015. Moreover, subject to Section 52, all challenge proceedings hearings will take place in public under the parent law. The transparency and public scrutiny of the process are therefore assured, and good fair determinations are unlikely to reach the court. An unfair or bad determination would probably inevitably lead to public censure even before it reaches the court. In the parent legislation, Madam Speaker, when the challenger or aggrieved party brings his matter, the procurement regulator sets into motion a tribunal very much as the one being proposed here. The difference, though, is that the entire process is managed by the procurement regulator. It is a transparent and open process, and it is also open to the public. One of the intentions of the procurement bill in 2015 was in fact to have transparency, accountability, and value for money as predominant concerns in the procurement legislation. And by bringing these matters into the public glare, it means that the press, the media will be able to attend. It would be very difficult for a bad decision to be taken in such a circumstance. And if it did, the member who is aggrieved, the person who is aggrieved, still has the option of going to court. So I find it very difficult to understand why we wish to have a second layer, and I will talk with that about that a little bit. So I asked the question in the letter to the minister through the secretary. What is the chairman through the secretary? What is the point of adding another layer of bureaucracy by creating another institution appointed by the president in consultation with the prime minister and leader of the opposition, which may well end up being a parallel institution with equivalent status when the substantive matter of review is already addressed by the 2015 parent legislation? In the 2015 legislation, the power of the procurement regulator was strengthened. So too is the autonomy of the procurement regulatory agency. The public hearings with regard to disputes guarantees any genuinely aggrieved party an absolutely transparent and open process. There is no need to create another agency. Another stated objective of the minister, he stated it here, 28 days, he talked about it a couple of times, of the review board in Kenya is to determine dispute faster and more efficiently and therefore deliver justice quickly. That is one of the intentions of the Kenyan legislation from which he has drawn his parallel. And when you look at it carefully though, under that system, we find that it actually takes a phenomenally longer time than it takes under our procurement legislation here in Trinidad and Tobago. In the 2015 Trinidad and Tobago law, all required actions deriving from a complaint take place within 7 days of receipt of a complaint, and the entire matter is resolved within 21 working days after receipt of the application. This is inclusive of the 7 days. 20 days is less than half the time that the Kenyan review process takes. It is important to note that the Kenyan legislative framework for procurement is rather cumbersome. In Kenya, there is a Public Procurement Disposal Act of 2005. They have the regulations of 2006. Beyond this, there's the Public Procurement Oversight Authority, the Public Procurement Oversight Advisory Board, and the Public Procurement Administrative Review Board, which is the review board. All of these in the Kenyan law are accountable to the minister. In Trinidad and Tobago, the 2015 legislation, the Procurement Regulatory Agency is meant to function as one oversight, compliance, and appeals institutions accountable to Parliament. That is a big, big difference. The legislation is much tighter compared to what obtains in Kenya. The bureaucracy is more streamlined, and the entire process much cleaner and more efficient. It is to be noted that in the preparation of the 2015 legislation, the matters of advisory committee and a review tribunal were both considered. So these issues were considered in preparation of the legislation. The advisory committee was rejected early on, and a review tribunal was included in an early draft. In fact, this was a draft to which the private sector Joint Consultative Council elements objected. They said that that version of the legislation, one person said that that version of the legislation should have been burnt. And we then sat down with them and went through the entire process, and they agreed on the legislation that we had, that we ended up with and passed into law by consensus. And when we were doing the legislation in Parliament, those private sector groups, in fact, wanted the legislation passed as it is. They did not support the amendments of the opposition at the time, which included this review board. So if they have had a change of mind and a change of heart, first of all, it is something that they are entitled to have. But I want to say that it is certainly not what prompted the minister to bring the amendment to the House. It was an amendment that he brought to the House on the last occasion when the parent bill was debated. It had nothing to do with prompting by the private sector.
Ulterior motive.
Now,
Ulterior motive.
under the 2015 Act, in keeping with a decentralized approach, every public body carries out its own procurement in keeping with the objects of the Act. Secondly, the 2015 Act covers all public bodies, public-private partnerships, and every single transaction that involving government which involves public money. It is also not true to say that public property is not involved, and I will explain from the Act how that, in fact, is involved. And basically, the parent legislation covers all the issues related to aggrieved parties raising objections to anything that might have gone wrong in a procurement process. And I want to say that this review tribunal really undermines the authority and autonomy of the procurement regulator. You see, under the procurement legislation, what you have is the procurement the regulator does not give out contracts. The procurement regulator doesn't manage a procurement process for a particular project. That is not what the procurement regulator and the board does. That is done by the ministries. It is done by the public entities. It is done for any transaction involving public money. It is done by any state or state-related institution involving public money. What they do their transactions, and when they complete the process, they forward this to the procurement regulator, and that's where the scrutiny process takes place. So the procurement regulator is not a procurement determinant in the process. The procurement regulator is above the process and is an adjudicator, together with his board or her board, of the entire process of national procurement of every entity in the country. And when the minister was a member of parliament in the last round, that's to say in the opposition, one of the two arguments that he made having to do with objections to the bill and wanting to make amendments, in fact, three arguments that he made. The three arguments that he made were as follows: that the regulator had too much power, the procurement regulator had too much power. A review tribunal was necessary to curtail that power. And thirdly, the issue of the disposal of land, which he claimed was left out, but which I will indicate was not, in fact, left out at all. So that this review tribunal is really meant to curb the authority and power of the procurement regulator. And I want to explain a practical reason why I am objecting to the review tribunal. If, since the Minister of Finance,
I would really like to hear the contribution from the member for Caroni Central. Please continue, member.
Yes. The Minister of
When he was in opposition.
no, at that time he made the points that basically the procurement regulator had too much power. We needed to curb this. This was a thing. But let me give you a practical example of why I'm objecting to this review tribunal. Something happens in a company or in a ministry having to do with a project, and someone becomes aggrieved. They bring an objection before the procurement regulator, who is separate and apart and distinct and above all of this. The procurement regulator then initiates the process by which the matter is addressed. And a decision is made on the basis of that complaint in the public glare, open to the press, in which all the parties participate and in which any member of the public can be present. And these things can also, if it came to that, be part of a televised process in which the entire nation is involved in hearing the... And that decision is made. But somebody in a government is not happy with the decision because the person who claims being aggrieved, or the person who got the contract, or whoever, it could be the person complaining or it could be somebody else, indicates that they are not happy with the process. That matter can then be referred to this second process, this second layer of adjudication. And based on the proposal made by the Minister of Finance, there is a significantly larger control of that process by the Minister of Finance in terms of regulations, in terms of the determination of the structure and organization of the office, and what the Minister of Finance is actually going to be setting up here with the regulations is a procurement court separate and apart from the procurement bill that we have passed in this House. And it is now going to be brought into this legislation as a second element. And my own feeling, Madam Speaker, is that it is absolutely not, unnecessary. It is going to complicate the process. And he himself used the word convoluted and retracted it in his presentation. And it is going to create a nightmare for procurement in this process. The other thing I want to say, and I heard the minister say it, and it's part of the minutes here, he said on the basis of representations made during the committee process, he is going to bring other amendments to this legislation before this House. And I want to say that when this It is minuted here, and he said it today. The committee agreed to recommend in its report to Parliament, I was not present at that meeting, by the way, that another amendment bill be drafted to capture his recommended amendments, which fell outside of the mandate of the committee.
So another amendment coming.
So, I was not at the meeting. I wrote a formal letter to the Minister as chairman, indicating why I could not attend. It was for very extenuating circumstances. He refused to respond. He did it on purpose because he knew the private sector was coming. I meet all my responsibilities and obligations, whatever they are. So,
But he was away for a year from the committee.
What, you ran for a year?
Imbert. Yeah.
Anyway, what I am saying, Madam Speaker, is that when we brought this legislation to Parliament, this government, then in opposition, did everything possible to prolong the process and to undermine the process.
Yes.
Initial 30 minutes have expired. You are entitled to 15 further minutes. I suggest we take the suspension now, and you can continue then. This House now stands suspended for 30 minutes.